All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Connecticut's Old State House. I'm Mariana Garcia. I'm the public programs manager here at the Old State House, and I want to welcome you all for joining us today for the first installment in our spring limited series, the State's Filing Cabinet. This will be a three-part series, all done in partnerships with our friends at the Connecticut State Library. All the speakers during this series will be staff at the State Library or the State Archives, and we are really excited to be partnering with you on these joint programs. This series will be a deep dive into the government's paper trail, how state records are preserved, and how the public can access them. State records contain a treasure trove of information. They shed light in forgotten stories and people, and give us insights into the social and political development of our state. And Connecticut has been keeping these records for hundreds of years, since colonial times. So there are miles and miles of these records, and the way they are produced and preserved are constantly changing with evolving technologies and evolving needs of the public. Today's program will be focusing on record keeping in Connecticut, then and now. And we have Lisette Pelletier, I hope I pronounced it correctly, who's the State Archivist of Connecticut, and also Barbara Austin, who's the Digital Records Archivist at the Connecticut State Library, who will be talking to us a little bit about the history of how and why the state started preserving these records since colonial times, since the times of colonial Connecticut. If you have any questions during the program, we will have a Q&A at the very end, so just raise your hand and I will come to you with a microphone. If you are watching online, you can just type your question in the chat or in the comment section of the video, and we will see them, and we will be getting to them at the end as well. So yeah, without further ado, I would like to introduce both of our speakers today. Lisette Pelletier has been the Connecticut State Archivist since 2014. She has more than 35 years of experience in the field of archives and record management. Over the course of her career, she has focused on improving accessibility to the public's record, documenting untold stories, protecting historical materials through disaster preparedness and emergency response for cultural heritage organizations and outreach. The State Archivist also serves as the chairperson of the State Historical Records Advisory Board, which provides archival education to and facilitates cooperation among the state's historical records repositories. Lisette decided to become an archivist after receiving her bachelor's in American history because she didn't want to teach. Ironically, teaching people about archives through events like this one is the best part of her job. And Barbara Austin earned her bachelor's degree in American history from the University of New Hampshire, her master's in American history and a certificate in museum studies from the College of William and Mary, and her master's in library and information science from Simmons College, now University. She has been a museum curator in New Hampshire and on Long Island, and has worked as a librarian and/or archivist throughout Connecticut. She is the first digital records archivist at the Connecticut State Library, processing and preserving born digital state records. So now, without further ado, the state record keeping in Connecticut, then and now.
Thank you very much, Mariana. The mission of the Connecticut State Library is to preserve and make accessible Connecticut's history and heritage, and to advance development of library services statewide. By statute, the State Library serves as the official archives for the state of Connecticut, the permanent home of Connecticut General Assembly official transcripts and legislative bill files, and maintains a comprehensive collection of Connecticut and federal government publications from the late 1700s to the present in support of the State Library's role as a regional federal depository library and the Connecticut State Documents Repository. The Office of the Public Records Administrator is responsible for designing and implementing a records management program for executive department agencies, as well as the state's municipalities, political subdivisions, and certain quasi-public agencies. Currently, the State Archives contains nearly 50,000 cubic feet of paper records, including administrative files, court records, fiscal records, boundary files, genealogical materials, maps, and photographs. The State Library Government Documents Unit holds approximately 311,000 printed state documents and reports. The Law and Legislative Unit houses nearly 100,000 bill files dating between 1911 and 1988, produced by the Connecticut Legislature and available nowhere else in any format. It also holds over 10,000 volumes of legislative transcripts of discussions from both chambers of the Connecticut General Assembly, dating back to 1945, and committee hearings back to 1899. The State Library also maintains almost 2 million digital objects in the Connecticut Digital Archives. Over the next 3 sessions, we will explore state and municipal record-keeping practices from parchment to petabytes, how we manage and appraise these records for archival and historical value, and how citizens, students, and researchers can access these records. Before I really dig into colonial records, I would like to acknowledge that the indigenous peoples who reside in this area were creating their own records to document their history long before the arrival of the Europeans. Early European explorers, as you can tell from the quote on the screen, observed graphic and object-based record keeping among the Native Americans. This is from a report from 1768. When I was in elementary school, we were taught that wampum served as currency. According to the Pescomacati Nation wampum site, first people developed belts and strings of wampum to assist community members and the nations to recall critical events in their history. They embedded the information using carefully selected symbols, patterns, and letters and images. Thus, they were able to relay complex messages, intention, and promise by giving and accepting wampum. Wampum that was gifted or created to record events was meant to be taken out annually and to be read by wampum keepers. These people were skilled at reading wampum belts and sharing or interpreting their meaning for the community and visitors. In this sense, wampum belts, when given for an event or to commemorate an agreement, acted as a covenant much in the same way that legally binding contracts did for Europeans. And this is a wampum belt that was given by the Lenape Indians to William Penn at the signing of the Great Treaty in 1682. How government officials and people in general view records and record-keeping practices has changed dramatically from the establishment of the first settlements through the first quarter of this century. Records reflect the changing role of government and how officials govern, and we will explore record-keeping practices over this time. Before we begin, I'd like to review a couple basic definitions. So for the purposes of this talk, a record is information or data that is stored on a medium and used as an extension of human memory to support accountability or to share information or data created or received by an organization during its activities. Record keeping is the maintenance of a history's organization or person's history and activities, such as financial dealings, by entering data in ledgers, journals, or filing documents. I'd also like to note that the simple definition of technology is the application of knowledge for achieving practical goals in a reproducible way. So therefore, technology has been a part of records creation since human beings developed written language. I'm going to talk about non-digital record keeping. In the colonial and first half of the 19th century, the primary base for records was either parchment or rag paper. Parchment, especially sheepskin, has traditionally been used as the base of choice for important documents such as religious texts, public laws, indentures, and land records due to its strength and stability, and also because fraudulent text erasure and modifications are visible due to the unique structure of the skin. Connecticut's Royal Charter is written on 3 pieces of parchment. Parchment making is quite involved, as you can see from the illustration here. The parchment maker removes skin from the animal and cleans it. He then stretches it on a wooden frame, scraping the skin with a special carved knife while alternately wetting and drying the skin several times to create the required thickness and tautness. Paper during this period was made from pulverized cotton, linen, and sometimes hemp rags. Paper makers depended on rag collectors for their raw materials. Rags were often in short supply and were imported often. The fibers are mixed in a vat with water to form a slurry. The paper maker then dips a wire mesh tray into the slurry and fills it with enough slurry to create the desired thickness. After removing the sheet of paper from the tray, it is pressed between pieces of felt and then hung to dry. As far as ink goes, the most commonly used ink for writing records was iron gall ink. It gets its name from the iron galls, and there's an example here on the screen. Those balls are iron galls, which is a growth triggered by parasitic insects that attack oak trees. It is composed of 4 main ingredients: tannins extracted from the galls, iron sulfate in the form of bluish-green salt crystals, gum arabic from the acacia tree, which serves as the binder that improves the flow of the ink, and water or wine. The ink's rich dark color is the result of oxidation when it is exposed to the air while writing. Unfortunately, iron gall ink is also acidic and eats through paper. A less common ink was carbon-based ink. It was manufactured from either charcoal or lamp black, made from the soot of burnt animal fats or other oils, tars, or resins. The charcoal or lamp black was then thickened with an organic gum, making it adherable to the parchment more readily. Quill pens also needed viscosity of the gum in the ink to write properly. When English colonists arrived in the Connecticut River Valley in 1636, they brought English methods of record keeping. The earliest records granted property rights and set up the structure of government. They also documented the contractual rights and obligations between parties, either in business or government. Sometimes there were conflicts between documents. The Massachusetts General Court granted several groups of Puritans permission to settle along the Connecticut River, and those groups were the authors of the Fundamental Orders, while another group of English Puritans claimed ownership of the same land through the Warwick Patent of 1631, which is also shown here. And then, of course, the Royal Charter was issued in 1662. Clerks hand-copied information into the official records that were maintained in chronological order in ledgers. Recording transactions of information in ledger books and bringing loose papers together in bound form were the basic methods used to assemble and maintain written documents. Documents usually were kept together by document type, so business records, court legislative proceedings, correspondence, etc. And then they were arranged chronologically within that. The House Journal shown here on the left is several ledger books for multiple general court sessions that were bound together. Loose documents were folded tightly and bound together by tape. The tape that you see there is kind of a pinkish hue. That's from a later date. It's not the original from 1784. However, it was originally red, and that's where we get the proverbial red tape of bureaucracy. And it's significant to note that government often adapts record practices that are first used in business. So, because a lot of people who serve in government come from the business community. One of the first recorded references to record keeping and managing government records is from 1661. The Connecticut General Assembly ordered the town clerks or registers to record all births and deaths that occurred in their localities, including those for enslaved persons. They were also required to record marriages and land transactions. If they failed to do so, they were fined. Barely 100 years after the Connecticut colony and the New Haven colonies united in 1664, the colony had a records problem. In 1841, the legislature authorized the purchase of any remaining colonial and early state records up to 1820, when the state government began operating under the Constitution adopted in 1818. This collection became known as the Connecticut Archives and was under the custody of the Secretary of the State. The Secretary of the colony at that time, George Willis, apparently was a pack rat. The second document that I have, the handwritten document that's on the screen there, is a General Assembly order to him to organize all the, quote, ancient papers that now lie in disorder and unfiled in his office before the next session in 1744. They offered him a £5 reward if he completed the job before the start of the session. Today, that's about $15,000 to do that job. And before we came over, one of our researchers found apparently what is his report back to the legislature on how he accomplished that. So we didn't have a chance to read it before we came over. The General Assembly made repeated attempts after that to acquire and preserve all records, especially land deeds. They even wrote to London asking for copies. In 1771, the General Assembly directed Governor Jonathan Trumbull to, quote, collect all the public letters and papers which hereafter in any way affect the interest of this colony and have the same bound together that they may be preserved. Governor Trumbull oversaw the work and kept the documents at his house. Unfortunately, Trumbull died before completing the project. His family considered the papers part of his property and sold a significant number of them to the Massachusetts Historical Society in 1840. The so-called Trumbull papers did not return to Connecticut until 1921, despite repeated inquiries by the General Assembly. Another family member gave the remaining papers in the family's custody to the Connecticut Historical Society. And it wasn't uncommon for people that held positions in government to keep the documents in their house. Okay. The record-keeping practices that we have today don't allow that, but it was very common at that point. The introduction of wood pulp to papermaking in 1843 was a significant technological change for record-keeping in both a positive and negative way. Wood pulp was cheaper and more plentiful, and it decreased papermakers' dependence on recycled materials gathered by rag pickers. It largely replaced rag-made paper over the course of the late 19th century for document creation. However, the chemical alum, which is used to make paper waterproof and prevent ink from being absorbed into the paper fibers and spreading out, which would lose the writing that was applied to the document. But alum reacts with moisture in the air to form sulfuric acid, which eats away at the paper. So you have acidic ink and you have acidic paper. Lignin, a natural component of wood pulp used to make affordable paper, causes them to eventually turn yellow and look old. So when you get your newspapers, which has a high lignin content, and you leave it out in the sun, and they turn yellow within a day. Same principle. Chlorine is used to whiten paper and remove lignin, but the chlorine residue also weakens the paper. So that's some of the things that we have to deal with records from the about 1840s to later in the 20th century. The typewriter was the first widespread modern technological breakthrough for records creation. American William Burt patented the typographer, shown in the upper left-hand corner, in 1829. However, like many other inventions, there were several other typewriting machines under development at that time. There is mention of a Pellegrino Turri creating a typewriting machine in Italy as early as 1808. Specifically designed for office work, the machine worked by using a lever to press characters into paper one at a time. While the design was patented in the early part of the century, the first working copy was not produced until 1893. Christopher Scholes of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, produced the first practical typewriter in 1867 and received a patent for it in 1868. The first commercial model was manufactured in 1873. It was mounted on a sewing machine stand. I don't know if you've seen the treadle sewing machines, so it was mounted on that. And by the mid-1880s, the devices were a common feature of offices in the United States. During the same time, Miles Bartholomew invented the first shorthand machine, and several decades later, Ward Stone, Ireland, an American court reporter, invented a commercial stenography device that included keyboard and steno paper, and that dramatically improved record keeping in the court system. The typewriter dramatically changed the way documents were created, leading to an increase in the way business and government officials collected and managed information. A writer with a pen was limited to a maximum of 30 words per minute. One of the resources said that that was a speed record set in 1853. I didn't have a chance to verify that. Stenographers and telegraphers could take down information more than 4 times the rate, up to 130 words per minute. While there is evidence for forms for documenting business and government activities having existed since ancient times, pre-printed legal forms began showing up in the early 19th century. These greatly simplified drafting legal pleadings with standardized language. The typewriter allowed both business and government to gather more information. Questionnaires such as the one on the screen here became ubiquitous methods of information gathering. This form here is from our WPA church records survey in the 1930s, and it is for an African-American church located in Torrington that is still around today. Developments in the branches of science concerning the formal systems such as logic, mathematics, information theory, systems theory, decision theory, and statistics impacted record keeping in both business and government. Taxonic classification systems use a hierarchical model, moving from the point of origin, and the groups become more specific until one branch ends in a single species. As you remember from middle school science, middle school scientists divided organisms based on this classification system. And this is the illustration here for the classification for our family dog, Bo Sox. And if you can't tell, my husband is a Red Sox fan. A taxonomy can be used to organize and index knowledge, whether it's stored as documents, articles, videos, etc. And in systems such as the Dewey Decimal Library Classification System that was created by Melvin Dewey, or a search engine taxonomy that allows users to more easily find specific information. Many taxonomies are hierarchies, but not all are. Records management taxonomy deals with classification of unstructured content within organizations. It can also include the metadata in structured database fields or in folder structures within the system. It is created to ensure the correct application of records management policies within an organization, integration of operational and knowledge management systems, and assist in the search for information. And it can be applied to both paper records and electronic records. And the predominant taxonomy used in the state archives is record groups, series, subseries, folders, and items. And Barbara will be talking more about this in the second half of our presentation. Now, another major impact for record keeping in Connecticut was the Progressive Era, which was in the late, from 1890 to 1932. It saw widespread social activism and political reform. Progressives were avid modernizers. They believed that science and technology would provide the solution to society's flaws, including corruption, monopoly, waste, and inefficiency. They fought perceived social, political, and economic ills by advancing democracy, scientific method, professionalism, and efficiency. The efficiency movement flourished, as I said, between 1890 and 1932. Adherents argued that government, business, and society were rife with waste and that they believed experts could study the problem, identify existing problems, and provide solutions to fix them. We now call these people consultants. The efficiency movement, as with other business practices, transferred over to government. Massachusetts created an Economy and Efficiency Commission in 1912 that made hundreds of recommendations. Connecticut's General Assembly passed a bill in February of 1915 authorizing the governor to appoint a 9-member commission consisting of members from the General Assembly or state or county commissions to report to the legislator in April of 1915. I don't think they move that fast now. They were supposed to provide suggestions on reorganizing and consolidating the various state and county boards and commissions with, quote, a view to greater economy and efficiency, to set the responsibility of officials, and of eliminating waste and duplication of authority. The Connecticut Commission was also charged with focusing on the public health and preventative laws to determine whether new medical and scientific developments could be more efficiently applied than allowed by law at that time. And this is the first of multiple efficiency commissions that have been created over the years by either the governor or the General Assembly, and we have records of quite a few of them in our collections. The filing cabinet's emergence in the late 1880s also transformed business practices throughout the United States and continues to influence technological advances a century later. According to historical analysis in this area, filing cabinets freed business managers from having to pore through ledger books or loose files for information. The corporate office evolved during this period. The filing cabinet is a product of modernization and the efficiency movement. In order to be productive and efficient, business needed more information and easier access to it. Filing cabinets make that happen. And I just want to note that originally it was called a vertical filing system, not because the cabinets are stacked one on top of each other, the drawers are stacked one on top of each other, it's because the paper was placed vertically in the folders. Okay. The vertical filing system placed documents in folders which were, so the same subject matter rather than the type of document was gathered together. And then the folders were placed together in drawers in the stacked cabinets. The design of the cabinets held the folders upright, allowing for new information to be added to either the folders or to the drawers and quickly retrieved. Filing cabinets would remain the main method of document storage in the business world for the greater portion of the 20th century, and that has actually transferred over in the computer systems, as we all know. And again, Barbara will talk a little more about that. And I could go into the whole business of how this genderfied roles within, but we don't, that would be a whole talk on its own. Okay, so document reproduction has its own technological developments. The first evolution of reproduction technology was simply transferring information by what is called the letterpress or copy press method. A clerk would write the original document using a special water-soluble ink that took longer to dry. The original document was then placed in a press and covered with a dampened sheet of thin translucent paper. The clerk tightened the press to create a partial transfer of the ink from the original document onto the copy sheet. The copied text is then read from the back side. So the ink is on the back side, and you read it through the sheet. In the early 1800s, Pellegrino Turri, I think we've mentioned him before, supposedly invented carbon paper or carbonic paper to provide ink for his mechanical typing machine. Ralph Wedgwood obtained the first patent for carbon paper in 1806. The first carbon paper was coated on one side with a layer of loosely bound dry ink or pigment in a wax coating. In 1954, that was changed to a polymer-based coating rather than wax, and the coating allowed multiple copies to be created at the same time, either handwriting out a form or typing the original document. This big monstrosity known as a rectograph or photostat machine is an early projector photocopier, which was considered cutting-edge technology in the early 1900s. It consisted of a large camera that exposed an image directly onto rolls of sensitized paper about 350 feet long. A prism in the front of the lens created the reversed image that you see on the screen. After a 10-second exposure, the paper was developed and fixed, and then either air or machine dried. And the result was the negative print. So if you wanted a positive print, you had to make another copy to reverse the polarity. This machine allowed the reproduction of multiple documents without any type of transcription. The Connecticut State Library was the first institution outside of the Library of Congress to have a retrograph camera. And state librarian at the time, George Goddard, convinced the legislature to give the state library the funding to purchase the camera by arguing that it could be used to copy town and significant institutional records from loss or decay. And we have tons of material in our collection as a result of that. And either the original was given back to the town and we kept the copy, or they took the copy and we kept the original. Okay, the machine now resides at MIT, we believe, in a museum. And it's quite an interesting device. Okay. Microphotography was developed in the late 1800s, producing small photographs that were typically magnified for viewing. One of its first uses was by the military. It was first suggested as a document preservation method in the 1850s by two astronomers. They saw the exhibit on the new photography technology at the 1851 Great Exhibit in London. They called it, quote, the most remarkable discovery of modern times, unquote, and proposed using microphotography to preserve documents in their official report. Microforms are scaled-down reproductions of documents, typically on film or paper, and made for the purposes of transmission, storage, reading, and printing. Microforms are commonly reduced to about 1/25 the original document size. For special purposes, they might even be further reduced. In 1925, the development of 16mm motion picture film allowed the recording of individual documents as still images, and that were added to the strip of film and fulfilling that earlier vision 75 years after it was first proposed. The three types of common microfilm formats are microfilm, which is in reels, microfiche, which is in flat sheets, and aperture cards. There were also microcards or micro opaques, which were similar to microfilm, but were actually little images printed on cardboard rather than the photographic film, and that's a technology that's no longer used. Okay, although the information is viewed using a reader that magnifies the image for easier reading, microphotography is still considered an eye-readable technology because it can still be viewed without a machine interpreting the data. So even if you have a flashlight and a magnifying glass, you can read the microfilm. Chester Carlson is credited with being the inventor of modern photocopying. He was a patent attorney, and he had a personal interest in its development because his job required him to make multiple copies of important papers. He had arthritis and found hand copying painful and tedious. Using his kitchen as a lab, he developed, he did experiments with photoconductivity and applied for a patent for the electrophotography process in 1938. He tried to sell his invention to various companies, but failed because the process was not perfected. He was turned down between 1939 and 1944 by over 20 companies, including IBM and General Electric. Neither of them believed that there was a significant market for copiers. He ultimately sold his patent to a small company that became the Xerox Corporation. Xerography, which is a dry copying technique, resulted in the first automatic commercial copiers for Xerox in 1960, and this copier made 7 copies a minute. They expected to sell 5,000 units over the lifetime of the patent, but they sold 10,000 in the first 12 months. So IBM and General Electric were wrong. And they just couldn't keep up with the demand. And I believe that the image here is the actual first model that was sold. In the 1950s, 3M revealed a new technology called thermofax, which uses infrared light with special paper. Unfortunately, these copies tend to fade over time because the paper continues to develop. So, in the interest of time, I will only state that during this time at the State Library, of course, the first state librarian was appointed in 1854. The Secretary of State transferred the Connecticut archives to the State Library. The Examiner of Public Records was created as an assistant to the State Librarian in 1911. And the post of State Archivist was created in 1884. And back in 1909, the General Assembly recognized the State Library as the state archives. So that concludes my portion on the non-electronic records, and I will turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you, Lizette, and thank you, everybody, for being here. Electronic records consist of information and data captured for storage and manipulation by an automated system, i.e. a computer. The same types of records that Lizette has mentioned are now found primarily in electronic format. We organize the records the same as we do paper, but electronic records are more fragile and take a lot more effort to preserve. Today, we scan or electronically create millions of records on a daily basis, and storage capacities have increased dramatically. We are now storing things in zettabytes. A zettabyte is the amount of data that would fill 250 billion with a B DVDs, or 36 million with an M years of high-definition video. Ouch. Whoops, wrong way. Ha. There we go. Unfortunately, the more technology we get, the harder sometimes it is to maintain the data that's on that, or was created by that technology. You'll notice from the chart here that digital data has the shortest lifespan of any type of media that would store records. I like the fact that film is 500 years. I'm not sure that would actually work, but we know that paper lasts 300, and that's great. Various materials have different life expectancies based on the technology that created it, but also the way that the media is later stored and accessed. If we're not mindful, very little information about our generation will survive despite our best intentions. While the original copy of the General Assembly proceedings from 1674 is still in really good condition, digital records and recordings of the legislature now could disappear almost in an instant. Computers have been around a little bit earlier than a lot of people may realize. The first recognized computer were punch cards that were used by looms to create jacquard fabric. And it was a punch card, and the pattern was actually somehow punched into this card, and the loom was able to read it. It's unbelievable. But the computers that we're used to, the first one was the British bomb, if you've seen the Alan Turing movie. It was used to decrypt German codes. By 1950, Remington Rand had created the resistor, and you'll notice that the computer is significantly smaller. The Intel microprocessor was developed in 1971. That's the item at the lower left there, which we still use today, obviously. And again, the computer has gotten smaller. And then finally, as the components shrink, so does the computer. And in 1975, you see the Xerox Alto, which actually did have a graphical interface. Until that point, there would not have been that graphical interface that we're so used to today. By 1976, ta-da, we've got the personal computer. This is in a town clerk's office or vault, and we don't recommend computers be stored in vaults, but it is what it is. The development of the personal computer made a huge technological surge. We've seen dramatic changes in the use of computers, starting from government and offices into most every home now, and impressive changes in their size, their appearance, portability, software, operating systems, speed, processing, and memory capacity. Unfortunately, not all files are created equal. File types can include structured data such as Word documents that we're used to today, or if you're old enough, you remember WordPerfect. There's Excel spreadsheets, there's HTML web pages, we have images that are electronic, sound, video, and then there's unstructured data including access databases and raw data. If a file documents the activities of the state, it's considered a record, and we're required to preserve it. Added to this challenge is that each agency may have software that is specific to their needs as an agency. We may not have access to that software because we don't have the license, and it adds yet another layer of complexity to trying to preserve these materials. Data storage changed over time. Instead of the nice piece of paper that you can pick up and read, we had punch cards. I did my master's thesis using punch cards to massage the data. There's also data tapes and magnetic tapes, and thankfully we haven't found any of those yet in the state archives. I hope I don't. From there, it went to floppy disks of all sizes, from the monster to the little 3¼ inch that we're used to CDs and DVDs, which we do have, and then to flash drives, a Blu-ray disc, and internal and external hard drives. And most of the materials we're getting now are on flash drives and on hard drives of one kind or another. Now you can tell you can't read what's on those disks or on that flash drive. You'd have to stick it into a machine somewhere. Unlike paper, where you could hold it up, or the microfilm, you could hold it up to the light and read it, we don't have that capability here. So we have got to use our thinking caps to try to preserve this information. Today, the way we access and share information has changed and will continue to do so. We now have smartphones, tablets, the internet, cloud storage. We also have wearable computers such as Google Glass and the Samsung smartwatch. In addition to the other formats that I've mentioned, there's now documents that agencies are creating on their own Facebook accounts, their Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. All of these are forms of social media, and they are closely held secrets, if you will. And we have got to use, again, our thinking caps to try to figure out the best way to preserve these records. In 2 years, even though these are all new, these could all be outdated or changed. The software and hardware we use today will probably be obsolete in just a few years. So how do we preserve these millions and millions of ones and zeros? One way is migration from an older program to an updated one without losing the data, we hope. The other is to put the records into a trusted preservation repository, which will migrate the documents as the hardware and software change, and also monitor whether there are changes within the data themselves. Added to all of the things that are created digitally, then we also have digital imaging, and everybody wants to have everything digitized and put up on the internet. This was all the rage in the 1990s. It used to make documents much more accessible. And because of digitization, we are often asked, well, why isn't everything in the library up on the internet? Well, you've heard Lizette tell you how many documents and gigabytes and terabytes and whatever that we have. We just don't have the staff. We also don't have, well, no. A lot of people don't realize that even though it's electronic, there's still a cost to storing electronic records. And then the third part, which is a large part of what I do, is creating metadata. All right, you've got these electronic things, they're ones and zeros. How do you know what's in that document? And the only way you know is by creating metadata, which is data about data. And I'll get into that in just a moment. So we've got all sorts of challenges and issues. How do we make sure that the record is authentic, that we can bring it to court and say, this is really what it says it is, and it can be used in a court of law? We want to make sure that the records are not corrupted over time. There's also physical threats to electronic records, particularly to CDs and DVDs. They are something called bit rot, and the information can actually disappear. You want to make sure that you're protecting personal information or even trademark secrets and things like that if you're a company. All right, you've got to make sure that that nefarious people can't get in there. We can make gazillions and gazillions of copies of a record, and so how do you know which is the right one? Which is the record, the official record copy? We could be inundated with multiple copies, and I don't want to do that, thank you very much. Software and hardware can be obsolete, as we've mentioned. I also mentioned the file formats. And it's often suggested that managing electronic records is like caring for a perpetual toddler. They need regular attention and care to remain accessible. So we recommend agencies check their files periodically to make sure that they're still accessible, ensure the technology required to read that file is still working properly, and ensure the media on which the files are stored are still readable before they come to the state archives. Just like paper files, electronic files need to be well organized and labeled correctly so that they are identifiable and accessible. We recommend to agencies that they use logical names instead of a series of numbers, that they keep it to a modicum of length. I've had records from Governor Malloy's office that were so long that I couldn't open them because it wasn't recognizable by the program that I have. Again, there's multiple copies. We ask agencies to make sure that they distinguish drafts from revisions, including dates, and the computer date now is month, day, year, because that's how the computer is going to sort it. If you do it the other way, it gets all cattywampus. And that what we really want agencies to do is to be consistent. Now, this is not the best example, but this is what my file system looks like on my computer. And even though you may not be able to understand all of the words, I know what they mean, and hopefully my colleagues will know what they mean, and they'll be able to figure out, should I get hit by a bus on the way back to the library, what I've got on my computer. What we're doing now at the State Library is preserving our electronic records and agency records in the Connecticut Digital Archive. This is a collaborative member organization that supports digital preservation and access for everybody in Connecticut. The server lives in the cloud and at UConn, but academic institutions, cultural institutions, the government, and even individuals can put material up on the Connecticut Digital Archive. We currently have, as Lizette mentioned, close to 2 million objects in the system. These are both electronic or born digital and things that we have digitized, like newspapers. We create metadata. I've mentioned that term several times, and so has Lizette. It's data about data, and we need to have that information so that we can identify what we have. And you'll see here I have a binary file name, which has to be unique. There's a label and a title that are very similar, but they're descriptive so that you have an idea of what you're looking at. Then you add personal names or corporate names or an agency name. That can be the person who created it or who collected it. And you'll notice in column I, there's a code called NAF. That is the the Names Authority file that is maintained by the Library of Congress. And I put in the code for the NAF and the code for the person in the next couple columns so that if anybody else has stuff from Sarah Kinney in California, we'll be able to get those things together intellectually. And people won't have to be worrying about where they might find the next bit of information on Sarah Kinney. There are also, we also record the date that the item was created, a description, and then subject headings to make it easier to find them. And there are taxonomies or authorities for both subjects and geographic locations that we use. So this is what the metadata looks like when it gets into CTDA. You don't have to try to translate that spreadsheet. It is relatively user-friendly, but I will warn you that right now, as we speak, the CTDA is migrating to a new platform, and everything may look a little bit different. We're still learning ourselves what it's going to look like. But it's still going to have the same type of metadata, and we'll still be using spreadsheets to get that metadata into Connecticut Digital Archive. And we're hoping that the search engine is improved as well, because sometimes it can be kind of clunky. And we just recently got a federal appropriation so that we could create at the State Library what we're hoping will be a seamless process for agencies to take their electronic records once they know that they're permanent and put them themselves into the Connecticut Digital Archive, taking me out of the loop so that I would have more time to work on other things. So anyway, stay tuned as we try to keep ourselves one step ahead of technology.
Thank you so much, Lisette, Barbara. That was really, really amazing. So we're going to open it up to questions. If anybody watching online has any questions, please do leave them in the comment section or the chat section of the video you're watching, and we will see them. If anybody here in person has any questions, just raise your hand, and I will come to you with a microphone. Yep.
So electronic files have bit rot, as you said. And electronic files have bit rot. And then high acid paper can react with the ink. And then different kinds of paper and ink can also dissolve. Is there any such thing as a permanent record?
That's the $20 million question. The rag paper actually is easier to preserve because it doesn't have all the chemicals in it. With wood pulp paper and with the inks, we can have them conserved. We can send them to a preservation lab, and they can take the acid out, or they can like put Tums, put it in a bath of Tums to take the acid out. I mean, it's not Tums, but it's the same idea. And they can stop the deterioration of the ink. So for paper, there's a lot more possibilities with bytes and bits. If they're gone, unfortunately, they're gone. I'm not sure we could ever get them back.
Another thing is where you house records. So if it's in a cooler, stable environment where there's not the humidity doesn't fluctuate, the temperature doesn't fluctuate, that helps maintain or reduce a lot of these chemical reactions with this stuff, so it can last longer. But we, that's part of the reason we're imaging things that are at high risk as well. So if we find something in our collection or receive something that's very valuable. We will send it off for conservation. And they should be done on a routine basis too. So we're working on actually sending the charter from 1662 up to a conservator to be treated. Because somebody decided that the ink was fading back in the 1890s, and one of the clerks copied over the writing. So, but they were trying to preserve the information, so we don't judge them too harshly. But yeah, but yes, there are ways to slow it down, but in reality, no, there's nothing that's really permanent.
Even if we get them into the Connecticut Digital Archive, I still have my doubts that, in 100 years, you'll still be able to read that stuff. That's the presumption I have, but I'm glad I'm not going to be here in 100 years to find out.
Questions? Let's take a look at the comments. Okay. Nothing coming in yet, but I have a question while we're waiting for some comments to come in from our online audience. So for copies and reproductions of records, such as the ones with the rectigraph and the carbon copy and all that stuff, which must have been very expensive, very time-consuming to create those reproductions. Who could get those reproductions? Because I'm assuming it wasn't for just any scholar, any researcher that wanted a copy. It was more like specific people that were going to be able to get those reproductions.
Well, as I said, George Goddard argued that he would use it to make copies of local records. So a lot of the towns brought their historic records into the state library. They were copied, and either the original went back to the town, or we kept the original and they took the copy. So we have that. They did it for churches. In fact, there was a church fire, it was in Windsor, one of the congregational churches, maybe about 5-6 years ago, had a fire and burnt down, and we had copies of the records that were created at that time. So they were able to recreate the records for the church community. Institutions could bring their records in. Like we would have, some of the things we had were like the Masonic lodges would bring their stuff and we would copy it. Goddard would copy it. I wasn't around then. Yeah, so it was made available to a lot of people. We also had institutions outside of the state that sent things in. We didn't keep copies of it, but they would make copies. And I'm not sure. Let's check.
Obviously, it wasn't something that was available just around the corner or down the street.
Yeah.
It was expensive technology.
And eventually, as things do, the funding dried up, and then the library stopped doing that. And then technology changed too. I mean, we moved on to microfilming. We had our own microfilming unit that did a lot of the same stuff. And now we're scanning.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anybody else here have any questions? Oh, there's a question. Oh, I don't see it. Can you see it, Paul? Oh, I apologize. I'm not seeing it on my phone. I'm going to come over to you.
How do you determine which electronic copy of a file is the official copy?
That is left up to the state agency. So when they transfer them, they should be transferring the copy that they considered the official copy. We don't have a lot of direct transfer of agency records. I think the only thing that's coming right now is our regulatory records from the Secretary of State's office, and that's part of the reason that we're doing this federally funded project. So.
The next portion of this series, there'll be someone from the Records Administrators Department, and they'll talk a little bit more about how we determine which what. But generally, if it's something that came from the president or the commissioner, we're going to keep it in the commissioner's file, and he may have sent it to 20 gazillion people in his agency. We don't want those 20 gazillion. We want the one that he created. So we try to get it back to the originator.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Let me. Oh, that's the same question. Okay. All right. I don't see anything else coming in. Oh, cool. All right. Thank you. That was the question.
Technology is not always perfect.
Sorry about that. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, which I might be, I don't see any other questions coming in online.
Oh, we have one here.
Oh, right here.
You can always submit questions to us as well through email. You can reach me at my first name, Lizette, Lizette, Pelletier, Pelletier, at ct.gov. And if I can't answer it, we have just a Crackerjack reference staff that I can forward to, and they will be here on the third session talking about how do you access these records. So.
My question is, if we find that electronic records have such a short shelf life as compared to not electronic, why don't we turn more digital records into physical records if they would last longer?
Because they take up a lot more space. We have a secondary site down near the Colt building, and we thought when we moved our records, or some of our records there, that we'd have enough room for 10, 15 years. Well, sorry, it's been what, 7, and we're running out of space. So yeah, paper just takes up so much space. Yeah, I mean I don't know. It's a conundrum. It's a real conundrum. And I'm looking forward to retiring so I don't have to deal with this anymore.
I mean, the archives reflects what government does. Okay, so government in the course of business is interested in accessing information now and using information now, and that's what electronic systems do. They don't think about the small percentage of records that have to be preserved, quote unquote, forever. I mean, some people do, but for the most part, that's not the top thing. Records exist for the operation of government or a business, or even your own personal records. I mean, I'm sure most people don't think about, oh, what should I be saving for my kids and grandkids? Unless, of course, you're me or the other people that work in our office. But yeah, the records are created for government to operate, and that's the primary concern.
And if it's a file or a record that they're actively using, they're not going to send it to the archive. What they're going to do is send stuff that they're no longer accessing on a regular basis.
Yeah, and the next session we'll talk about records retention scheduling and archival appraisal. And so you can learn a little more about that in 2 weeks.
All right, well, thank you so much, Lizette and Barbara. This was so informational, thank you. And also thank you everybody who has been joining us online and here in person. We really appreciate you coming down and joining us for this program. The next session will be in 2 weeks on June the 8th, also at noon, right here at Connecticut's Old State House, also online. We hope to see you there for that. And the last one will be on June 22nd, all of them on Thursdays at noon here at the Old State House. And we also invite you to check out our upcoming farmers market season, which is about to start on June 16th, along with our summer concert series here at the Old State House on front of our bricks. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming down, and thank you again to the Connecticut State Library for joining us in these programs. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Yeah, thank you so much.